And we will have recording today. So, and if people would like to have that recording off for the question and answer, you just put that in the chat. We can stop it. So I think I will get started. I recognize a number of names here and happy to see folks here. This meeting is specifically for those folks who work for and with Indigenous homeless community entities funded under Reaching Home and the Indigenous partners, service providers that they work with. And we know that those networks are big, so we are happy to see everyone here who might find this useful. We also have two representatives here from CAEH who may just be listening in or may be here to answer specific questions if you have them. And that's Lisa up there and Amanda as well. So thank them for their time and joining us today. And I'm going to get started. And the very first thing, just because I think it's important to know, is what dates are we working with here? So for the Homelessness Reduction Innovation Fund, the application system has opened. It opened on Monday. And the deadline to submit an expression of interest is August 15th, with the understanding that this is an expression of interest, that a full application is to follow. So that's your date. If you are intending to be considered and to sort of put your name in for this fund, that would be your timeline, would be August 15th. There are subsequent rounds to follow over the next 2 years. And the funding is weighted towards the end of this, which is good. It means we have time to learn from this process and improve how this goes ideally. So this is what I'm going to be talking about today, guys. Who am I? What is the NIHC? What is the CAEH? And what is what we affectionately call HRIF, the Homelessness Reduction Innovation Fund? What are the challenges with this fund and what are the opportunities? So I'm calling in today from Kasapsum territory, Esquimalt territory, and Lekwungen land in Victoria. This is actually not what it looks like right now. This was in the spring. We're having a bit of a heat wave right now, so I'm really enjoying that. The photo in the back of my face image when that comes up is a painting by Sunny Asu, who is a Kwakwakiwak artist who I really like. So the main topic for today will be HRIF eligibility for IHCEs. There are a lot of factors that go into applying for a fund like this. I know that you all are always on the lookout as advocates for your relatives who you serve and for the colleagues who you work with. You're always looking for new opportunities to find funding. We know there's never enough funding. And when you are looking for funding, there's a lot of things you have to consider. And the very first one is, are we eligible for this funding? And this particular fund has some challenging eligibility requirements that really supersede in some ways what the application itself is, the program that you are proposing. And we found in the first round that most of the work was going into eligibility. Most of the questions were around eligibility. So today, that's really what I'm focusing on. Down the road, we at the NIHC and also at CAEH have resources to help with the sort of crafting of the whatever initiative that you're considering proposing. And that's a process that can really be a longer process. From the time of the expression of interest until the application, there's a lot of time to work on and improve your application. So right now, it's really just about, do I qualify for this? Can my community possibly get this funding? That's what we'll be focusing on today. So who am I? My name is Mayana Slobodian. I am Red River Métis on my mother's side. These are my family names: Houl, Amiot, Savoyard, Saint Arnaud. My father is Ukrainian. He likes to say his family was, he doesn't like to say, but he often says his family was brought to the prairies in order to unseat and displace my mother's side of the family. So I have that history of prairie colonization really within me. But most of my family experience is on Vancouver Island. My name is English, and it's also Mumtigila, which is the Kwakwaka'wakw people from Vancouver Island around here. And I carry that name with all the responsibility that it comes with. And so a lot of my guidance and source of leadership in my life come from Namgis, the Mumtigila, and the Zawadena people. And my academic background, I recently finished my PhD in criminology. So I come into the world of homelessness with a really sort of broad thinking around, where our people are, how they get to where they are, and how we take care of each other in all difficult circumstances. But my political background and my work background is really in land justice. So my work has been, and my life has been very dedicated to returning land to Indigenous peoples and to expanding Indigenous jurisdiction, really in all ways, including in the work I do here now at the NIHC. So my job at the NIHC is, my formal title is Cultural Insights Advisor, which I think they sort of took a very broad general approach for a strategic reason, because it means I kind of get to do whatever I want. And on this project, it's the Homelessness Reduction Innovation Fund. I'm specifically advocating for IHCEs and their Indigenous partners in this fund. So that's my specific role with this fund. But at the NIHC more broadly, I hope you're familiar with us, and I hope if you're not, you will become more, because we really represent you. We are the National Indigenous Homelessness Council, is a coalition of the Indigenous homelessness community entities and the Indigenous community advisory boards. So we're primarily funded through Reaching Home, and we, as we always say, we work for our IHCEs. That's who our employer is. And our guidance comes from our board of directors. So you can see here our board of directors is drawn directly from those organizations, from, you can see here Hamilton and Luma and Homelessness Winnipeg. We take very close guidance from our board of directors, and everything we do really comes from those who work in community and who are dealing with these challenges on an everyday basis. That's very important to us. And so what that work looks like at the NIHC, this is our staff. You may be familiar with Shane. Shane has been around the longest. He's a man who's come up through lived experience and into working in community, and now has the position that he has. And he guides our team. And our main projects are the PATH process, the Personalized Assistance to Housing project, which is very much a forward-looking innovation into finding new ways to talk about, to assess, and to relate to our relatives in ways that don't reinscribe trauma or demand sort of confession in harmful ways. We also have our data lead, Leah Goulding, who works on our Indigenous Coordinated Access Project. And if you have thoughts or concerns around coordinated access, or particularly around data sovereignty and coordinated access, Leah Goulding is the person to talk to, and I'm happy to connect anyone with you after this if you haven't already been connected with her. So this is our first formal partnership with the Canadian, I think we can say, with the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, though we've all been working in similar areas for a long time. I won't speak too much on behalf of the CAEH, because they can speak for themselves, and I'll let them do that. But they have been around, founded in 2012. They are nationwide and growing. They have a wide range of funding sources, both government and private donations, things like that. And the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, as I understand it, are focused on data-driven approaches to solving homelessness. So this is a quote I just took from their website. "We believe ending homelessness is possible, and that homelessness in Canada will become rare, brief, and non-recurring." I think of Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness in a lot of ways. They're cheerleaders, they're a support network for a lot of homelessness reduction projects across the country, though most of their work, or maybe all of their work, has been primarily with non-Indigenous organizations. So this is sort of a first endeavor for us of collaborating together. So you may recognize a few of these projects under CAEH. The conference, they're the hosts of the national conference, and it's coming up in October. They have their Built for Zero program, which I'll be talking more about. And then they also have some additional services, training. In your work, you may have completed some of their training as part of your onboarding. They offer a lot of resources and things like that. But when it comes to HRIF, the main program that we're going to have to be contending with and learning more about is this Built for Zero Canada program. So from what I understand, it was initiated in 2015, launched in 2019. And this is just from their information here. It's a structured, supportive and data-driven approach to ending chronic homelessness. The program is aimed at optimizing local homelessness systems, accelerating the adoption of proven practices, and driving continuous improvement. So you can hear the kind of language we're using here in terms of, making sure that the money that is being spent in the programs that are being funded are doing what they're supposed to do, and if they're not, what can we do better? That's very much, for what I understand, at the heart of Built for Zero Canada. So how does this all relate to the Homelessness Reduction Innovation Fund? Is the Homelessness Reduction Innovation Fund just sort of another project? Or do we need to understand that? We need to understand the whole Built for Zero and the whole CAEH sort of universe, I think, in order to understand what the Homelessness Reduction Innovation Fund is, and particularly to understand what it involves. This is not really your standard fund where you apply for funding and you get the funding and you do the programming. Okay, maybe you do some reporting. This is a much more active and involved fund, a more active project. So I'll just read here so we can have a chance. So it says, the Homelessness Reduction Innovation Fund provides one-time grants for projects aimed at achieving measurable reductions in homelessness. HRIF grants will be distributed to communities for targeted, data-informed projects that measurably reduce homelessness. CAEH will offer one-on-one guidance and coaching to communities on their initiative and share successful approaches with other communities across the country. So it's part of Reaching Home, funded through Government of Canada. So this is a program that was funded through HICC, that CAEH and NIHC have partnered together in order to get this money from government to community. And the way that that is being done, or what can be funded, I should say, is what the projects that are eligible. Let's just start with what the projects that are eligible under the fund are: non-capital projects that are aimed at reducing homelessness by 1, increasing move-ins to housing, or 2, decreasing inflow to homelessness. So I put this up here partly to sort of indicate to you, just in the very first place, the kind of language that HRIF is really operating under, and that the program is really designed to encourage you to work within. It's very much like I highlighted in that last slide. I highlighted measurable, targeted, data-informed projects that measurably reduce. There's a lot of hints in there about what this fund is about. And this fund is very much a data-centric, measurement-centric fund. Having said that, what can be funded is quite broad. And I'm not really, like I said, going to go into that, because I think those sorts of questions can be answered down the road better by CAEH. But here's a few examples: targeted rental subsidies, post-remand landlord coordination, housing stabilization, wraparound support facilitation. And now here's a one: staffing for existing programs. Now that's a tricky one. I've consulted Lisa with this a little bit just earlier, because I want to be really clear about what I mean by that. One thing that's we've found already is challenging about this fund is that, you guys are working so hard to craft applications that will, get you through the door on this. And a lot of our applications have focused a lot on that word innovation, the Homelessness Reduction Innovation Fund. But really, the emphasis of this fund is much more on measurability. It's on reduction. That's what Lisa said. She said the main word in there is reduction. And how do we know the homelessness is reduced? Is through measurement. So the innovation aspect of it, I hope that in your applications, you won't break yourself over the coals trying to reinvent the wheel. It may be, for example, that you have programs that you're thinking, man, this program is working well. If only we had X, if only we had someone who could be, you know, coming in to interface with our youth program, someone who could be coming in to interface with our corrections, interface, you know, that maybe it's the position is where the innovation is, not necessarily in the program, for example. So just encouraging you to not tie yourself too hard to that innovation and to really focus on what I'm going to be talking about really for the rest of the presentation, which is data. So in order to be eligible, setting aside whatever the program initiative is that you'd like to propose, two very key things. You must be a Reaching Home funded IH community entity. You may also be DC. I don't think there's anyone here that is. You may also be DCIH. You might receive both funding, but you must receive Reaching Home funding unless you are a Built for Zero community, which I don't think there's anyone in this room that is. You must also have quality by name data as confirmed by CAEH. This is one of the questions that you would encounter on the expression of interest. It will say, do you have quality by name data confirmed by CAEH? And we found that most people didn't really know what that meant. So I'm going to explain a little bit what that means. I'm also going to point out that asterisk there, because I'm going to acknowledge right off the bat that I think very few, if no one in the room now does have this. So we're recognizing that that have is also can get there. So what is quality by name data? I am by no means the expert on this. The experts on this are all at CAEH, so they can answer these questions. But I'll give you the sort of broad strokes from what I've learned about it in the last couple of months. So quality by name data is real-time, person-specific data for people experiencing homelessness. It supports coordinated access, and that data is contained in HRIF or other databases, ETO, etc., and shared with CAEH. Quality by name data is not a by name list. I know a lot of communities have by name lists. That is that is part of, but it is distinct from quality by name data. By name data is a way of documenting and following our unhoused relatives, you know, in order to better serve them. However, quality by name data, I mean, we could even have a little TM there because it's a very specific term. That is a way of ensuring that that data is reliable and valid. And that, in this project, is determined by the CAEH. They're the ones who determine how, whether the by name data is quality. And how do they do that? They have this very sophisticated confirmation process. So you can see each of these, they have different categories of requirements in order to be considered to have quality by name data. There are 13 categories here, and the organization must have 13 out of 13 in order to be confirmed for having quality by name data. And the way that confirmation process, oh yeah, so there's my asterisk. You must or be able to achieve. Sorry, I'll go back to here. The way that confirmation process goes, I might hand over to Lisa or to Amanda to explain a little bit, or we can leave that for a subsequent one-on-one conversation. But just to say that this process of quality by name data confirmation is very much at the heart of CAEH's Built for Zero dashboard system structure. So in order to understand that, I'll just explain that so that your applicant, in order to be eligible, you must be the IHCE. However, to receive a HRIF grant, you must collaborate with your HIFIS or HMIS license holder, your DCCE. So for some people, you are yourselves the data hold license holder, and so that's a more simple dynamic. However, for others, you are not, and this will require collaborating to greater or less degrees, depending on the circumstances of your DC and their relationship to the CAEH. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. So this is the process by which one gets confirmed for quality by name data. You can see down at the bottom, reaching home checklist, you've got scorecard, the by name data scorecard, coordinated access scorecard. This is what the CAEH, if you enter into this process, CAEH's improvement advisors, they're called, will meet with you, walk you through this, and they have a very sophisticated and coordinated process to reach that quality by name data. And all of their experience is, generally speaking, working with the DC community entities, including those that hold both IH and DC funding. However, for those of you that do not hold that, that's where things get a little bit more complicated. So one of the reasons, just taking a little step back from HRIF, one thing that we found out that's happened with this fund, I will say, from a little bit of a new perspective on this, is that this HRIF fund has really made evident some issues around data sharing under reaching home. So this is the sort of, as I understand it, the basic structure of data flow for most organizations, the sort of simplest version, that service providers provide data to IHCEs, IHCEs provide data to the DC, and then the DC submits it to the IH. Service providers may also be providing information directly to the DC. So there's a sort of flow of information, of data. This is a one direction. There's also flow that goes the other way, but I'm just talking right now about the sort of outflow of data. So this in itself is something that a lot of organizations have been, I would say, a little begrudgingly operating under. And there's been a lot of uncertainty for IHCEs about this entire section. What is being passed through here, what and why is being passed through here. So this is data sovereignty is a very big topic, and it's been sort of, everyone has been sort of thinking about it and figuring out what to do. However, HRIF came in, CAEH and NIHC came in and said, hey, why don't we just complicate this all? Step into a situation which is already kind of complicated, and now we're going to enter CAEH into it. And essentially what that has done is created another data sort of loop here from the DC to CAEH down to HICC. And in fact, a third loop, which is the sharing, the sort of public sharing of the HRIF program, which is very much part of HRIF, that there's a funding of programs, there's a measuring, and then there's a sharing of those programs. So there are two additional places where data is being shared. And what we have found is that there are concerns from IHCEs that this be done properly, and that maybe we come up with forms of accountability and transparency around this data sharing that probably should have existed before now, but have not. Data sharing. That's the big piece. So I just want to talk, I think most people are really aware of the issues around data sharing and the sort of broad strokes, but I just want to give a very brief few-minute discussion about data sharing, just to kind of give you a sense of what our thinking is at the NIHC. So when we talk about data sharing, we talk about two different sort of levels. We have our individual level, and we have our organizational or institutional level. So we've all been, I think the government has been doing some work around recognizing the issues around individual data sharing. The main question being, are our relatives in control of their own personal information? So this is the sort of model when we think about this data, we think about individuals that are sort of have their own personal data and that the organization is gathering this data and the data is moving through the organization up to the government. That's the sort of, I'm a very visual thinker. I find these sorts of images helpful to help me sort things out. So within this way of thinking, the main issues are around consent, privacy, and we have been moving forward in developing structures of personal data privacy and consent. However, there's another level, which is this collective, organizational, institutional level. And this is more from the perspective, not of individuals, but from the perspective of the organizations. Are we good stewards of our relatives' data? And are we in control of our own institutional knowledge? So not only their personal information, but also the information of the organization itself. The keywords here would be jurisdiction and self-determination. When we talk about an individual, we can talk about individual sovereignty. But when we talk about the sovereignty of an organization, we start to talk about self-governance. What is our realm of jurisdiction? And the way that Reaching Home has been designed has already been such that it has undermined our jurisdiction in a structural sense that it's simply how it is. We submit our data to an organization over which we do not have control, and we know that. We know the government knows that there are problems, and what we're trying to do is find ways to improve this. So this would be sort of the movement. Rather, you have your individual information moving up to the organization, but then on first difference is we don't see the organization as directly clustered under or contained within government. We recognize ourselves as having our own sphere of jurisdiction, our own sovereign realm of our own power and decision making. And we recognize that it's not only personal information that's going into government, it's also the collective knowledge from the organization. So that doesn't just mean, that's the kind of programming we provide, that's the kind of stories we tell. It's also the kind of questions we ask. How do we tell our own stories? How do we document our relatives' experiences? How do we define success? How do we evaluate our programs as, within these systems? So this is a little bit already of a different model of, or a next step out of thinking about data sharing for institutional organizational data sharing. And essentially what we're seeing here is, this is my attempt to model when we are getting involved, a bigger organization, let's say CAEH is up there, NIHC could also be there. We are also an organization which you share your data with and which we receive funding and resources from the government for that. And, every time information and data is being shared, there's resource allocation. We as Indigenous people understand that knowledge is power and knowledge is resources. And, like I always say in pretty much every meeting I go to, as Indigenous people, we read the small print because we know what it all means, and, from our history. So when we look at this sort of structure is sort of similar to what we're seeing here. We're seeing organizations sharing with different, passing data that in some cases is anonymized, is shifted, it's repackaged, and it's shared. And at this point, from my understanding, from my meetings, I've not talked to any organization under Reaching Home that can fill this graph out at this point. When we talk about truth and reconciliation, it's the truth we always say is the first. And I think this is the sort of truth of the data sharing, is what is being shared and with whom. And of course, what needs to follow that is how, why, and when. How should that data, when can we withdraw our data? When can it be used? For example, up here, when can say we participate in a program, when can it be shared and to whom? And do we get to have our name on that? Do we get to approve? Do we get to tell our stories ourselves? Do we write it? You know, all of this, all of these questions are strangely undefined when it comes to reaching home and homelessness reduction in Canada. So just to say, this is in the circumstance where you have an IH and DC that are combined, one organization receiving both those funding. So that one organization holds the HMIS license, but of course it gets more complicated when you don't, and that's the position that I understand most of you are in. So I think I'm not telling anyone in this room anything they don't know. I think this is all very much the world in which you guys are operating. And what we at the NIHC are trying to do is use this opportunity with CAEH to get all of this information, all of these issues down on paper and start to find steps forward so that we can resolve some of these long-standing issues around data sharing. So when we talk about data sovereignty, you know, this is such an overused term. It's sort of becoming like reconciliation. I think it's kind of lost its meaning. People use the term OCAP. You know, we say, oh, we follow OCAP and we're OCAP trained. And I just don't think we have to be reminded of the weight of what those words really mean. So sovereignty is a very big word, right? Like sovereignty, power, authority, controlled jurisdiction. I think when we talk about data sovereignty in Canada, a lot of the programming, a lot of the educational materials, including that's put out by, say, the AFN, they've done so much wonderful work, but it's all very much structured within the band structure. It's within a First Nations model where, you know, you have your very clear sovereign governance under the Indian Act, you know, and it's all sort of nested under the Indian Act. But like everything in Canadian state Indigenous relations, once you get out of that, things become really murky. And I think the Canadian government has struggled to see urban Indigenous organizations as having the kind of authority that would constitute sovereignty in creating these in recognizing organizations as community entities under the Indigenous Homelessness Reaching Fund. The Canadian government has, in a sense, created little sovereign organizations, but we haven't really, as Indigenous organizations, felt around the corners of what that sovereignty is. What is our exact jurisdiction? And we know for a fact that we do not have jurisdiction over our data in the way that we would like to. So much of this challenge is understanding what our reasonable demand for sovereign control over our data can be. And again, with data understood in a really broad sense, information, knowledge, truth, you know, records, data is a sort of small word for a very big concept. So in this project, in this HRIF, you have your sort of big HRIF banner and there's the programs underneath it. But what we found is that we've struggled to move forward without addressing the knowledge sharing, data sharing agreements that would be necessary to enter into those arrangements with CAEH. And thankfully, CAEH has been very open to making progress on this. I think they've recognized that HICC has sort of handed a pretty big chunk of work over to them, and that there's a certain amount of sort of having stepped in the data conversation, and that there's more work here than initially met the eye. And so for those communities that would like to participate in the HRIF program, the first step really will be creating these knowledge sharing agreements that are respectful, accountable, transparent, beneficial, reciprocal, and responsive, because HRIF really demands a very high degree of data sharing between the IHCE, collaboration with your DC, depending on what that relationship is like, and depending on whether or not your DC is already involved in Built for Zero and what that Built for Zero, what their degree of involvement with Built for Zero is, there may be quite a bit of work for the part of your DC. And so there's a lot in here, basically, but the goal is that through this project, we can actually make progress on challenges that will have much broader reaching implications. Say you have the opportunity or you've been approached by a nonprofit or by a charitable organization that's interested in entering into some sort of reciprocal relationship. Our hope is that we will be creating tools through this process that CAEH is the sort of house. They're the partner right now, but that hopefully we'll be creating tools that you can then take to another partner and say, hey, we have this knowledge sharing agreement. We've been through this knowledge sharing process, negotiation process with CAEH. Here's what it looked like. We now know where our data is, where it's going, and we can create a knowledge sharing agreement that will suit that. A new relationship that you have, whether or not that's to an outside organization or maybe simply improving the relationship between yourself and your designated community. So I'll take that as a moment to pause. So that was my dog just giving me the warning to slow down a little and maybe give you time to absorb. But I made this little flow chart, and I'm very visual. I don't know if this makes sense to other people, but it's sort of a flow chart of eligibility. So is your organization the IHCE for your community? If you're not, you must collaborate with the IHCE. They would be the primary applicant. If you are the IHCE, the question would be, do you also hold DC funding? Are you End Homelessness Winnipeg? Are you United Way? Are you LUMA? There's a number that are. And if you are not, you can apply on your own, but the designated community entity, who came up with that name? Seriously. The designated community entity, as the HIFIS or HMIS license holder, will be required to, in order to achieve quality by name data. So there may be some people in the room that represent or are part of some Ontario communities that are under the Ontario Federation of Indigenous Friendship Centers. So if that is you, then I'd like you to make yourself known and we can talk, because that's a little bit of a specific situation. But aside from, because they're a large organization that represents a number of smaller friendship centers, but for most organizations, I think here you are in relation to a larger designated community entity. And so it would be necessary for you to know what would be, how much would be involved for the designated community, and also to assess, is that a relationship, say, that needs improving? Is there work to be done on the transparency and the data governance that you have within that organization? Then there may be work that we can do through this project on that relationship. If that is a relationship that is not, we all know there's a lot of dynamics in a lot of different organizations. So just that's something to keep in mind and to talk to myself, talk to the CAEH about as well. But the relationship with your DCCE can be a fairly big aspect of this project. If we imagine that you are both IH and DC, do you have quality by name data confirmed by the CAEH, or does your DC have quality by name data confirmed by the CAEH? That's a kind of question you can go onto the Built for Zero Canada website and you can just look it up. Look up your community, look up by province. I'll tell you shorthand, there are none in British Columbia. And I'm not sure if there's anyone from British Columbia here. I'll go back to the main window to see, and we can talk about British Columbia after that. But most likely, you will be in the position of needing to work with the CAEH, with your DC, in order to have quality by name data confirmed. So I'm going to end it there. And I just gave you guys so much information. So I thought I'm going to just open up for clarifications or for questions because I threw a lot at you. So are there any questions right off the bat? Oh, are there some in here? No. So are there any questions off the bat? You can raise your hand or you can just unmute. Hi, Joanne. Oh,
I am wondering what the difference is between the HRIF mainstream and the Indigenous stream applying for funding. So what are there different criteria? Is there a different differentiation? Because
great question. Yeah, very good question. And there's like the long answer, which is like, at first it was going to be, but then the money shrunk and then it got combined. Like there's a whole background, but the essential answer is that no, that there's not separate streams, that both are, you have the same application process and you're assessed in the same manner, from my understanding. What is different is, I would say, to be honest, there's a little bit more work for IHCEs because of that designated community, because of not holding the license for your. Sorry, Joanne, do you mind telling me which community you're representing?
So I'm Fort McMurray, actually, and I believe that we are we would be the IHC, and I think we primarily receive all, if not most, if not all, of the Indigenous funding for our region. Yeah.
Yeah, so there is not a there is not a separate stream. Same funding and same process. Maybe just a bit more challenge in terms of particularly around data governance because of the community. There's probably a little bit of some extra steps that are required. Do Lisa or Amanda want to take that question? Because they have the broader picture.
I saw you were going to unmute Amanda and then, yeah, sure. I'll take it. Hi, Joanne.
Hi.
Yeah, so Fort McMurray, the designated community, does have quality by name data confirmed. And so as the IHCE, we'd support you in working with the DCCE to be able to use that QB&D confirmation as meeting the eligibility criteria for HRIF. Does that make sense?
Can I just confirm, is there a separate IHCE? Like is Wood Buffalo? No, it's separate.
No, we funnel under, so the RMWB is the CBO that receives all of the funding and everything is flowing through the RMWB. So they would be definitely the DC, but they are not the Indigenous service provider. We are the Indigenous service provider for the community. So I'm getting a little bit, the terminology is a little bit confusing. But Cheryl is here.
Yeah, so Cheryl, I actually asked that question in the chat because I was also thinking something similar around, I believe that the region of Wood Buffalo is the contract holder for both Reaching Home Indigenous Homelessness Stream and designated community entity stream as well, correct? And so it's that entity holds both. And so what I would suggest is just to connect with Cheryl or whomever else at Wood Buffalo and talk about the project idea. Like an agency can come up with an idea, but you'd have to partner to some degree, as Mayana and Lisa both alluded, just because they hold the systems level data, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Thanks for that question, Joanne. Stephanie, I see your hand up there.
Hi, thank you. So I'm the Reaching Home Manager with ALFDC, and we're the Indigenous community entity for the City of Toronto. So we have a good relationship with our designated community entity, and we work pretty closely in partnership together. But 2 questions just for clarification. So we don't have our own by names list through the Indigenous stream of Reaching Home, but the City of Toronto, I believe they have a quality by names list confirmed by Built for Zero. So we're not able to be the primary applicants for this fund. Is that correct?
No, you would be the primary applicant.
Okay, so we could
Yeah.
still be the primary applicant. So
Yes.
when you say work with your designated community, what does that mean?
Yes, it's vague language, but it's vague for a reason, because maybe Lisa can explain the sort of range of involvement that the DCs are required.
Okay.
Yeah, I think because like the DC, I guess is it the city of Toronto? Like
Yep.
so
Yep,
they
City of
would
Toronto.
be the ones that have that like the eligibility component around confirmed quality by name data. So you could use their confirmation, right? But would have to be able to sort out everything related to data sharing in that piece, because essentially you would be using their data in order to like measure project progress. So the eligibility is really about, do you have quality data to be able to measure the success of your projects and pivot along the way and change along the way based on, is what we're doing working or not?
Mm-hmm.
But because the city has that confirmation, like you could work with them in order to still be the primary applicant, but how do you use the quality by name data that the city has in relation to your project? That's why it would come into play that you would likely be connecting with them.
Okay, I feel like I understand. So projects that are funded through us for this fund will have to be monitored by their data system.
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
And just in practice, like just to put some picture to this involves, meeting with us and with CAEH. This program is almost designed like experiments, and in the sense that the CAEH will work very closely with you to say, what data point do you have existing? What intervention are you going to make, and how are we going to measure that? And the issue with that is all measured with quality by name data, which is all managed through the Built for Zero dashboard, which your DC is the one who, they have the keys for it. They're the ones who, whether or not they report manually or through some sort of API, they're the ones who have that. So making sure that communication that's why that chart sort of from you through your DC to CAEH, that getting that flow is there's some design work there as well.
And buy-in from Indigenous organizations, because not all Indigenous organizations buy into sharing their data with the designated community entity. So
sure.
yeah,
Yes.
it can
Therein
get
lies
complicated here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I will just, before I answer, I'll be very quick just to say, we recognize there's such a range, of relationships and of feelings and trust. And we really want to, we're not, there's space for all of the different kinds of relationships here. And we want to recognize the great dynamic. Sorry. Okay, Carolyn, I see your hand up there.
Yeah, I guess when I, as the rep from the Ontario Federation of Friendship Centers, I guess I wanted to follow up on whether or not a one Indigenous stream community entity can apply to multiple times, and also this may have been. I feel like I'm concerned that this may have been answered already, but for the quality by name scorecard, the 13 out of 13, and that is different than the quality binding data foundations. Then that's shown on the dashboard by province on the Built for Zero website. Then the 3.0, we have quality binding data. That's just the basis for their scorecard. They would need to work with CAEH to fill out the entire scorecard, correct?
So I'll take the first part. Yes, you may apply for different projects with different service providers or partners through the same IHCE. And I'll let Lisa answer the question about foundations scorecard.
Yep, the foundations is the same as the image that Mayana showed earlier with those 13 elements. The foundations quality is, I think, like aligned with the reaching home language about like what are the minimum requirements for having quality data. So yes, if you see on the website like a community that says confirmed for foundations, they're meeting those 13 elements. They're meeting those requirements. And then I missed, I don't think I answered fully your question. Is there something else that I didn't cover?
That was the main thing, just kind of confirming that the 3.0, if the community online is listed as yes 3.0, then that is pretty much the same thing as having the 13 out of 13 score on the scorecard.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
wonderful. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. And Thomas? Hi, Thomas.
Hi. Hi, I'm going to be speaking, it's Janet Clark from Winnipeg. We're both the CE for the designated and the Indigenous streams of funding. I guess my questions more relate to CAEH's involvement and what is being done with sort of the data that is going to be sort of going in that direction. Because when I'm looking at the project idea I have, if it's talking about reducing the entries into homelessness, those individuals are not likely even going to get onto that the list that is being shared. And so I'm trying to sort of wrap my head around that, but also is that agreement that information is shared just for the duration of the project? Or after the project is over, is that if that information does that cease at that time?
So I think that's a very good question and astute sort of sense of the stakes of things. I think what I have been hearing from CAEH, I'll answer, I guess, the second part, and I'll let them maybe answer the first part about what they plan to do with the data, is that part of this process is figuring out from our Indigenous perspective, how do we assert and make our needs and our desires and our boundaries clear. So how do we say to CAEH, how do we construct our concerns around data in such a way that they can either agree or not agree? Do you know what I mean? How do we create an accountability document that says, these are the conditions under which you can use X, Y, Z, and this is what you can use them for, and this is how long? I think that, I mean, that's the whole process of creating data sharing agreements. They have their own templates for those, but of course we have our concerns and our small print desires are much richer. So I would, if I can speak a little bit from my perspective on that, I would say that's yet to be defined, and that can be defined by each individual community. I would say that's part of the premise of this, is that this is an opportunity to define the boundaries of your of the knowledge sharing. Amanda, did you want to speak to that more specifically?
Sure. I think one of the challenges that we're operating within, just to name, is that I want to be clear about differentiating like what is driven by the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness and what has been mandated or required by the federal government. And many of the challenges that have been downloaded regarding data sharing, data sovereignty, is really the responsibility ultimately of the federal government. And we're trying to unravel this together at an operational level so that all communities have access to this opportunity in this fund. So that being said, I can definitely answer your question to say we do have a data sharing agreement. In terms of any time that a community is sharing their data, it goes into great detail. We would be happy to share a copy of that with anybody if they're ever interested. As Mayana also mentioned, we can further articulate those terms in a shared agreement letter or understanding as we enter into the project, but I'll tell you what gets shared and with whom. So your example about preventing people from coming in, we do not collect individual level personalized data. We look at overall outflow and inflow. So for example, if you're trying to prevent the number of newly identified people coming into the system, what we would be able to access and see, let's imagine your newly identified every month coming in totals 20 newly identified people coming into the system. And you are aiming through your initiative and through the funding to reduce that by 5 a month. So your aim then would be to see 15 or less total people coming into the system as newly identified every month. That's the level of information that you would be sharing with CAEH. So we would be able to see the aggregate number of inflow and outflow every month. In terms of the other points, that is more nuanced and less clear at this point, but to say that we are willing to work it out is that knowledge mobilization. An important part of the project is to be able to share the learnings across communities and scale what's working and try things in other communities should they wish. And so there is this, let's imagine if your community did actualize that they had, 5 less people coming in as newly identified because you were able to provide an intervention that, resolved the issue and helped them get reconnected to housing and supports in a different manner rather than coming into the service system. That we would ask, we would want to highlight that. But of course, like the way we tell that story, who tells the story, who owns the story, it's not clear. Our intention is that you own the story. But that's not clear. And so part of that data agreement that Mayana is alluding to would be something we could definitely articulate. And then lastly, I just also want to say that we hold the contract for HRIF funds with the federal government. And so we have to report to them our success measures. And so again, your project would get rolled up and accumulated into, they say, I'm just making stuff up now, but 70% of all projects actualize a reduction in homelessness. So your success or your outcome of your project would be rolled up into that calculation of 70% amongst all projects that get funded from us. So I hope that I'm just trying to be really as articulate and transparent as I possibly can about what data gets shared. But again, certainly happy to continue the conversation and let's just have the hard conversations and ask away. We're willing to give you and share with you whatever we can to be as transparent as possible.
So Amanda, my understanding then that you're not actually receiving the quality by name data. You're only receiving the data that relates directly to the outcome that you're wanting from the project.
We would be looking at the total inflow and total outflow. And so just to clarify, when we talk about quality by name data, we are talking about 6 indicators of inflow and outflow. We're not talking about your priority by name list, which would identify people and their needs and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
We don't collect any of that. We just look at your total inflow and total outflow. Yes.
Okay, yeah, so when you're saying the inflow and outflow, that's making a lot more sense to me in terms of what information, because we're gathering that, we're sharing that already at a community level. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, Amanda. Any other questions, burning questions before we go? I saw Lisa gave some very helpful dates and explanation of process in the chat there, that the invitations to complete the application are extended on September 2nd. So this is a long process, and it really is a process that involves a lot of consultation. In some ways, it's more like putting your name in, and then you will be assigned myself and other CAEH people who will help walk you through it. So
I have another kind of, I don't know if it could even be answered, but I'm just like in Alberta, at least, our homelessness rates are increasing exponentially, like, and they have been for the last few years. So I'm just wondering what, like, that we need to show with this fund. We need to, one, I'm also kind of wondering the push on innovation when I feel like, as an Indigenous service provider and like coming into the scene and developing new programs, all of our programs are innovative in the last few years. So it's like, I kind of feel like putting that's sort of like yeah, that's really nice, but we want you to do something else. Like, so that feels a little awkward, but because I do believe that we're really working hard on our current evidence-based programming, and we can show that it's very innovative and it's working. And then it's like this push to create something different and more. But what is, like, if we are not able to, like, we're up against these multiplying numbers right now in our, especially in our 7 cities in Alberta. What if we don't show a decrease? Like,
I really hear you. Like, I think this is a really important point. Also, in terms of thinking about putting this amount of work into something like this and thinking, yeah, I think this is a really important point. And it is in some ways a cultural, there's a cultural gap between the NIHC and the CAEH on this, which is the NIHCs, we represent these organizations that are actively working. We are a coalition of the organizations. And so a lot of what we end up doing is talking about the lack of resources, the things that aren't working for us, the challenges that we face. We're reflecting those challenges. And the CAEH is very much a different kind of organization. Like I say, they're organizers, they're cheerleaders, they're sort of like thinking, and so they always want to talk about what's working, where are we going? Let's identify why isn't it working. So, and I think there's a sort of, we're a bit more on the critique kind of side and sort of advocacy kind of side. And so I think there is an awkwardness to this fund for that reason, but I think it's built into it. Like, and we at the NIHC are really retaining our right to tell our story, even about this experience. If we say, hey, the federal government came to us and they said, how can you reduce homelessness in 1 year in this one tiny way? Maybe the stories that we get all across the country is, we can't. We can make incredible changes in people's lives. We can intervene. But if you're talking numbers, that number's not going to go down. And that's a story. And it's a story I'm sure the CAEH is very familiar with at this point. They live in the same world that we all do. Like, things aren't working. That's kind of the idea of this, right? Is like,
and that's sort of how it feels, is that we're working so hard on our programs that we've developed over let's say the last decade or the last 2 years or whatever. And it just feels like creating a new fund for innovation when we're struggling so much and justifying and facing, systematic racism and oppression within our communities. It just feels like, what if we propped up the ones that are really working, or propped up the Indigenous programs that are really working, and just focused on that? And that was kind of part of my first question, is like, is there a differentiation in this fund for Indigenous and the mainstream? Like, is there a different set of criteria or a different lens that isn't like a Western world view that we are, like, are there considerations of this? Because it kind of feels like we're just supposed to, as Indigenous, we're still expected to fit into this very colonial system again. And it just, I don't know, kind of feels a little.
Yeah, doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm even being told, like, innovate. It's like, oh, what you're doing isn't right. It's like, we're doing everything we are thinking of, like, yeah. And I
say that to my face. That's like, it's kind of like, oh,
yeah.
But not really.
I think,
I'm not mad about it. I'm just saying, I'm just giving some feedback on it, because it feels, like, come see us, see what we're doing, and say that we're not innovative.
I appreciate you saying that, and I think that's helpful for Lisa to hear. Lisa, can communicate that. She's really a listener on this, and I think it's important for people for CAH to hear that, and for the government to hear that. That, and it's also a bit of a kind of startup-y kind of logic, like, oh, what we need is new. Like, can't we get AI involved somehow? There's definitely that feel, but that's yes, I appreciate that feedback. What I will say is that in terms of the way that the fund process actually moves, I don't think that is as much a part of it. I have heard from other participants in this fund that the innovation is not actually as central to it as it seems. That word was really, if I can say, a little bit of an afterthought in some ways. That the focus is much more on data-driven measurability, and that's got its own issues. But just to say that not emphasizing the need to be innovative, both to yourself, but also in this work, I would recommend. Lisa, any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I totally agree. And thank you, Joanne, for bringing it forward. Can definitely bring it back to our organization as well, to CAH. Yeah, the innovation piece of it is much smaller out of it, but it's still in the title. So I get it. Like, it's still there. This is still what it says on the website. But yeah, I think what we were trying to get at initially through that word was that the fund isn't for continued programs. Like, we wouldn't necessarily look to fund something through this fund that would need ongoing funding. Instead, it's to test a proof of concept, to say, this is what we're going to look at to try to reach our aim of reducing Indigenous homelessness. And then thinking about scalability, how would we find sustainable funding for that? So the fund, because it's has an end, a very clear end. So we're not looking to fund, ongoing programs. So the word innovation was much more tied to like the iterative, like one time piece of it. And I think that got lost in translation. But yeah, really, really helpful information and feedback. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Joanne. And our noise canceling headphones friend. I see your hand raised.
Hi, it's Vanessa. Can you hear me?
Hi, Vanessa. Yes, we can.
Hi, sorry, my phone's going to die shortly too, but I'm wondering, with some of the considerations, to see a decrease, we're like, just like every other province, are the external environmental factors going to be considered as well? Because right now we're in wildfires, our numbers are exasperated. They're going to continue to spike. So we're just wondering what that looks like as well.
If I can say, as an IHCE applicant, your bigger barrier is going to be getting to eligibility. And when you're thinking about how to measure and assess the change, I would say that I just feel it can come down the road. And, I think none of us are naive about what y'all are up against. And we personally at the NIHC really feel like that's going to be the story of this, is look at all these wonderful programs, and it's a drop in the bucket, this wonderful work that people are doing. So I don't want you to, I don't know if I'm speaking too strongly from our perspective, but I don't think you should feel that that's the metric that you're really, it's not about being judged about whether it has, it's just about, can we measure it? What does that change? What does measuring a change look like?
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. I just don't, I don't want you to feel that you're going to be unfairly evaluated. I mean, I'm sure you do, and I'm sure you are all the time, but we are going to be working as hard as we can to keep that out of this fund. It's one of the reasons we partnered with CAH with this, is to be eyeballs on it and to advocate in those ways. Yes, and sharing the learnings across the country. Yes, we should all be in touch more and communicating more. I just wanted to see, we've the people who are hanging on have any burning questions. Gus, if you had anything you wanted to raise, or
No, nothing from my end. It's just I'm a little bit confused, Lisa. Just having attended the session last week, it felt like there was quite a focus on the innovation in that conversation. And I'm just kind of wondering if there was a change or something, because I did attend last week's session, and it feels like it's a different story being told here today.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. I think, yeah, I think it's it's tricky to be like, what do we mean by the definition of innovation? But really what we're trying to get at is one-time projects. So they should be, if, for example, you wanted to apply to the fund to have a like additional staff person, or to be able to continue funding a staff person where your money's going to run out for them, then we would think, oh, okay, but what are you like trying to learn from that? Like, what are you learning as to if that helps you reduce Indigenous homelessness or increase move-ins, whatever your project aim would be. So there is an element of like testing, right? Like Mayana, you said the word experiment. Like there is an element of that to the projects because they're one time. It's like, what are we going to do to see if we learn from that? So it is a one-time fund, and I think that's where the innovation piece comes in, because it's like not to fund an ongoing program.
because how could you measure it? You need to have a sort of, you need to be able to apply the change, right? That's the sort of key. But I think that's really helpful feedback, Gus, that you're hearing different things in here and in there. And that may also reflect the fact that while there aren't different streams for the Indigenous and the non-Indigenous, there are greater barriers for the Indigenous applicants. So I think there's more space being made for the Indigenous applicants in a more informal sense. Which I think they maybe didn't anticipate needing, and it has become clear that is required. So it's kind of a response to the situation.
But is there knowledge as to how much money is available in this program?
I was supposed to get somebody asked that last week, and I was supposed to get the total for each round. And I don't have that on hand. I'm sorry. There is no like specific limit of what you could ask, what you could apply for.
What were the ranges in the first round? It was huge, right? From like maybe 25,000 to like.
Yeah, and I don't know if we gave a
Like
range,
wild.
like a starting range. I think we just said how much we had to give in the first round. There are 5 rounds of HRIF, and I just can't remember what that number was. So I'm really sorry, but I will.
Is that going to be distributed to us so that we know? Like, because
Yeah.
there's a big difference if we're planning for 50,000 or up to 3 million. Like, we need to know that.
Yeah.
Fairly quickly too.
Yeah, I can find out by end of day and send that number along to the folks who registered for this info session. So I would have all of your emails.
My experience with the first round was that they sort of left, they were like, well, we're sort of leaving it. We also asked for like if there was any quota for Indigenous applicants, and there wasn't. So I think there is a sort of looseness, which I appreciate you guys like maybe asking for more specifics, because that's what I think is required.
Is there any discussion as well about like, so creative, new and innovative ways we've been doing stuff? We help redirect lots of brothers and sisters, relatives back into ceremony, and that's going to be collected, or however its data is collected. But are they also talking about like after we've helped support that, are they also then going to support those spaces that have taken on that extra work? Like, because it's elders, it's ceremony spaces, it's families, it's like, are we just gonna leave that alone and leave them with all the work now? With no
Like
funds?
after the end of the program.
Yeah, because a lot of the times we're supporting people redirection into spaces that are already not funded. They're looking and begging or not even actually asking anything. And so sometimes those spaces that we're helping to support are drying out as well because they just can't keep up. But then here it is, the federal government and agencies such as yourself are collecting data, but then not supporting the back end of what we're taking off.
Yes, I think that's a very
Sorry.
good question and is not currently part of the program and should be. Thank you for telling me, giving me it so clearly articulated, because I will bring that to the CAEH to I mean, we've already talked about how do we build in before the program supports, but after the
Yeah.
program supports as well.
I
So-
say in a kind way is like when we think about it, we have our elders, our knowledge keepers, our pipe carriers, all the bundles that have been doing their work for generations, and now they're welcoming it because we never close a door to people of brothers and sisters that are at a different level of need of spiritual care, of love and kindness in different variations. And so they're outcomes are still what they are, but they're, I would say, not a burnout, but a tiring of the spirit is more quick, right?
Mhm.
And so we're losing that faster than
Mhm.
whatever. And so the agencies and funders of these things are not considering that. They're just expecting us to outcome that or to then tie it into an agency program. And but it shouldn't be that because the real ceremony is not inside the cities, right? It's not
Yeah.
the outcome. Yeah.
Yeah, my first thought, I really appreciate you raising that. My first thought is there's sort of two. One would be if you are considering making an application, finding space to voice that and
Okay.
to even build into the budget, you know, however it is. Another one is to consider whether that a one-time grant structured in the way this is should be very carefully you know, contained. Like maybe you have to, that's something to really consider because this is, I mean, it's not only just a one-time grant, it's a one-time grant with this very specific start-stop logic, you know? So, yeah, I think it's really important to keep in mind, and maybe this isn't the best place for certain projects. I know that I'll just share one thing, which is that I know there was one application which I was one community had applied specifically around housing, post-remand housing, and they were sort of suggesting that this would be an opportunity to show how coordination, housing stabilization for post-remand Indigenous men, how this would be an opportunity to illustrate to their provincial corrections how important. So they sort of identified, they're like, oh, we can use this to make a point about something else. Like there's something we know is sort of going on, but no one really believes us. And then if we can use this as an example to say, look, we did this very specific little, almost like a study that showed we have people, you know, who are coming into our shelters or coming, you know, who are, however, at this moment, and we're going to create evidence that's going to show it. To think that if that may be a useful sort of lever for like a useful evidence for you, that's another way to think about it. Like, you know, what is some sort of situation we see that we're having trouble sort of being believed on or have, you know, being heard on. And this is a way that will really give you a lot of documentation of that. So the documentation can be sort of problematic for in some kinds of things, but there are also maybe some situations where you want that documentation. You want to be able to show, you know, and show in a way that the government, right, that they hear us. Because you can show a million times the way that we speak and they might not hear it. But this is a way to use the language, like CAEH really knows how to use the language that the government hears. So is there a way to leverage that for some need in your community? That's another way to approach it. Just want to, I have another meeting coming up shortly, but I just wanted to see if there's anything else sort of hanging in people's minds. Well, I really do appreciate everyone's time here today and your candor and, in this discussion. And I know this is a lot, and we always know that this is not your primary job. You guys are doing a lot of other things. So we appreciate your time and the commitment you have to going above and beyond for your organizations and for your community. This is your presence here is evidence of that. Even if you decide not to pursue this, we appreciate you taking the time, and we hope that you'll be in touch with the NIHC if either of those projects that we talked about as well, if you're interested in getting involved around coordinated access, or if you just want to talk about some of these issues around data sovereignty. That's a big part of this project. So if that's something you're interested in, I welcome you to reach out to me as well, or our folks at the NIHC. And I want to thank Lisa a lot. It's not an easy position I think she's in to be answering all these questions. And I really appreciate the spirit that you came with, the listening spirit you came with, and your openness. And I think we'll close there if there's no more questions. Okay. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for facilitating the conversation. You're welcome. Thank you for attending. Thanks a lot, everyone, for your conversation and for coming. Bye-bye.